Welcome back to the Practically Pastoring Podcast. My name is Frank, and I'm glad that you're here again. 2 weeks in a row, the whole gang is here.
Dude, we all wore the same clothes. That's crazy.
Oh, this is crazy.
Kind of embarrassing.
It is, man.
Yeah.
It's dedication.
It's wild.
I'm up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Jeff is up in Baltimore, Maryland. Delmar's down in Sumter, South Carolina. Andrew's in Clearwater, Florida. And Timothy Miller is out at Trinity, Florida. Whoa, look at that laser show. What's happening? Hey, guys, real quickly, this is the last week where you could get the Practically Pastoring Conference rate at $39. It's gonna go up in price October 1st. So you need to immediately go to practicallypastoringconference.com to enjoy this amazing conference that we have going on February 17th to the 19th.
This is the last opportunity for you to be the best steward of your church's money. Next week, you steward the money a little bit less.
Yeah. Only slightly less, but you can steward the most right now.
Next week, you're going to get away from me, you wicked, lazy servant. It's not good. It's not good. Jesus does not like bad stewards. I've read about that.
Go out into the outer darkness.
Ooh, that sounds terrible.
All right. Well, before we spell into heresy, hey, we want you to be there. We have amazing things planned. I'm being sincere when I say this. Reach out to any of us. We would personally want to answer any questions about the conference that you may have. We want to see you there. We got a lot of stuff planned. But yeah, February 17th to the 19th, 2025, down in Tarpon Springs, Florida, at Lakeview Church, at Tim's Church. It's going to be awesome. We hope to see you there. All right. So we have two very, very practical questions from the Facebook group. And so let's talk about it. The first question is this. Any tips or wisdom for somebody candidating for the first time? So this might be a person that for the very first time is candidating at a church. What's your advice?
Well, I can say I have not candidated for the very first time in 15 years. So it's been a long time. However, I have made a few hires in the last few years, and I've definitely seen some pros and cons of going through that process. For me, it is always being crystal clear up front when it comes to the candidate. That this is both ends, right? This needs to be on the church as well as the person looking. I'm looking for a very clear job description. I'm asking the church very upfront, like what is expected of me week in and week out. I don't want any surprises. And the big one for me 15 years ago, and it would still be big for me today, is what is and what is not expected of my spouse. You're hiring me. You're not hiring my spouse. Doug Fields, your first 2 years in youth ministry, actually has an entire chapter dedicated to this. I know it was specific for youth ministry, but I still use the same question. So Doug actually gave you a list of about 12 questions to ask the church that's interviewing you when they give you the opportunity to ask questions. I use those same questions for Lakeview when they interviewed me as the lead pastor 5 years ago. So that was very, very helpful for me. So a lot of good resources out there. But guys, you might have gone through this more recently than I have.
Well, I know, like, as far as first time ever candidating, I think a couple things I would recommend to throw at you. Before you're ever going to see them, they're going to see you most of the time. And it's not going to be in person. It's going to be on a resume. It's going to be on social media, because that's anyone who does their due diligence. They're going to look on there. So I would take some time before you even officially enter the candidacy world to get a resume that's like worth it. Like I actually spent hours on mine. I know that sounds stupid, and it's not just the words; it's where the words are placed. It's the font you use. I decided to do mine in black and white. I will tell you this: my church, they saw my resume. They're like, "This looked creative. We were looking for a creative guy, but it's not overly creative." Those kind of things matter. Whenever you get your resume together, when you look at it, just by looking at it, it should be able to reflect your personality without even having to necessarily even read the words. Does this thing blink who you are as a person? And then I would also say, if this might be stepping on some toes, but churches want to know that you could take care of yourself. So like, if you got a beard that's scraggly and you can't really grow facial hair and it looks nasty, like shave up, man. Eat less, work out a little. You want to be presentable. You don't want to look like somebody I wouldn't trust congregants with. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just being honest. So make sure that you do that. Also, your social media, I would encourage you check on that. Rule I have personally, if I can't put it on the screen in church, I try not to post it online anywhere. Mainly because that's not that I'm going to put anything on the screen in church, but you know what I'm saying? If my people can't read it, I don't need to be posting it. So meme page aside, but the point being, that's before we even got into an interview. I've done some things to take care of my own appearances, my resume. I've taken care of some online things. And then also when you're candidating for the first time, whoever you put down as your recommendations, it's good to have recommendations that are also good people who are candidates. Does this make sense? Like, I don't want to give a recommendation for a guy who's like, oh yeah, he was fine, he was cool. But you want you want someone, if they're going to call your recommendation, it's always good to have some people on your referrals who also are good at being candidates themselves, because they're going to be vouching for you. So I'll be honest, when my current church called one of the pastors that was on mine, they liked him so much, like, okay, if these are the kind of people he surrounds himself with, that says a lot. So I know there's a lot you guys can add as far as when you're finally okay. Well, I'll hang it up there, but that's before you even get there.
I go ahead.
Oh, I was just joking, saying that I was the person that they had called, saying,
oh yeah,
and I said all the good things about Dell.
And
That
Andrew,
was-
and they were just like, that Andrew guy, can we just get him? And I was like,
You're
nah, he
friends with
loves his
Andrew.
church.
Then
Yeah.
you must be a great fit here.
Yeah, they were like, that Andrew guy wouldn't come after we called him, so we're just gonna go back to you now.
I agree with Dell on the social media front, that like you should take a very earnest look at your own social media and any sermon clips that you've posted. Like, let's say you have your own YouTube channel or something, just because they will look at it, and people will absolutely have a very strong view of who you are based on your social media.
Oh
We're currently in a political season, so what you post, if you're sharing Turning Point USA articles, or if you are liking liking a bunch of stuff one way or the other, like, people
which
will
that's
catch
fine
it
if that's a church that you want to go, if that's who you are, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just be mindful that, like, even the stuff that, like, you like on Twitter, for example, can be seen for other people.
Hey, can I say one more thing to that before we move on?
Sure.
Go to Google and type in your first and last name. People
Yeah.
are really good at scrubbing their social, and they don't think that people will go to Google. If you go to Google right now and type in my first and last name, up until like a year ago, it still pulled up my MySpace account. I had to go in there and take that thing down. I found some sermon clips that I preached probably 15, 16 years ago. And I was like, that was a different version of me. So I had to do a quick Google on you as well, not just social media, because anyone who's, especially if it's a church that maybe, if you're interviewing at an older church, they might not even go to Facebook. They might just go to Google and type in, Andrew Miller, and see what comes up.
Andrew Miller. And one thing that might be wise is actually, when you do that, go in incognito mode, so that way none of your, like, browser history colors your search results, and then you'll probably get like a pretty raw example of what shows up. But yeah, I think ahead of time, making sure your social, not that you want to cover up who you are, but like, if there is something that, like, oh yeah, I posted this meme as a joke, but it can be construed the wrong way if people don't know me, that kind of stuff, you don't want that on there. I will say
You're
this:
not covering up who you are. You're curating who you're letting them see.
Yeah.
There's a big difference in that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody who's interviewing for any position ever wants every bit of their life story available to the interviewers before they get to know you.
Yeah. The other when we talk about candidating, this is beyond like the interview process and like creating a resume. We're talking about like actually showing up at the church, right? So
Yeah.
I would say,
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah.
I would say like here's one thing I've found to be true with some of my friends who were at like a mega church or a multi-site church, and then they're candidating at a church that's like maybe a single site church or smaller or something like that, and they're like, I got this in the bag. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm at Willow Creek, or I'm at Life Church, or I'm at these like big churches, and then they go in and then they're like just kind of like a jerk, or like kind of like arrogant, and like, no, like, you need to go in there with a heart of humility, knowing that like this church certainly can benefit from your experience of wherever you are, but like you're also going to learn a lot of things being in this new environment. And people could sniff out arrogance. And actually, if you do come from a larger church, that might be at your detriment, because people might be like hesitant towards that or leery towards that. And if this really is your first time candidating, then you might not have a lot of experience. So when you go in here, have a posture of humility, saying, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to sit under any coaching. I'm willing to be led well and to do what the church needs to be done. If this is really your first time candidating, understand that like there's stuff you might not know. And then in general, like just be nice to people. You know, don't overlook anybody. Like if you're sitting in a room full of elders and there's an elder that's like clearly 20 years older than everyone else, like don't just focus on the other people who are your age. Like talk to everyone, be nice. Make sure if you're candidating with your spouse, let your spouse talk, like give her attention while you're there. People will watch and observe your relationship with her. Anyways, there's a lot of like small things there. What about you guys? What about Andrew? What tips do you have?
I think a lot of times churches hire someone based on the 1 or 2 30-minute sermon clips that they get, or 1 or 2 30-minute sermons that they get to listen to. So if you are a candidate, and I'm assuming that this is if you are candidating for a lead pastor role for the first time, that's just kind of the way that I read the question. So you're probably a youth or an associate pastor already going into this. I would say find a sermon that you really love, that's yours. Don't write a new sermon. Don't spend the 15 or 20 hours that you would spend writing a new sermon, but instead spend 5 or 6 hours polishing up an old one, and spend that extra time getting coffee, getting to know, like spend time with the people that you're going to be serving with, because far too often pastors are hired based on who they are for a half an hour with a microphone, but then the other 39 and a half hours a week, they don't get along with the people that they're supposed to be leading and serving. And so you need to make sure that you are a culture fit besides, hey, they like the way that I talk for a half an hour. So that is the biggest thing for me is, do you want to be their pastor or do you want to be a preacher? Because there's a difference between the two. And if you're interviewing for the position of pastor, you better be able to pastor these people.
I would say too, just clarity on everything. Like if they don't have a job description written for you, like that's a red flag. You want to know, it's going to say and other duties as needed probably, but just what are their primary things that they're looking for you to do? If you're going, I've candidated as both a worship pastor and as just a senior pastor. And so, when I went to candidate as a worship pastor at one church, I went there and I was young. And so I was willing to, in my mind, I was like playing games with things that I like, I could probably be all right with that. They wanted me to lead like a kids choir. I had no desire to lead a choir, but let alone a kids choir. I was like, my whole thing was like, I want to develop like bands. I was big into the Mars Hill idea back then. I thought that was cool and the way to go. So that was what I was all trying to do. And I remember I left that candidating and went to talk to another pastor friend in town who I was friends with. And same denomination. I told him where I had been, and he knew the senior pastor. And he got into the doorway of his office, and he said, "Do you see this?" And he started banging his head against the doorway. And he was like, this is you in 3 years if you go there. Just understand that. And I was like, you know what, you're right. Like I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, I could deal with like leading a kids choir. No, it would drive me nuts. I would end up getting fired or, just like hating it. And like, that wouldn't be good for the church, wouldn't be good for me. So I would just say like, be really clear. Like I think Tim, you said clarity on not only like job description stuff, but if it's your first time candidating, you might still be in the stage of like being very, very passionate about theological things that will later become secondary issues for you. And that's fine. You should do that. Be passionate about them. But I would encourage you to get out a piece of paper and make 2 columns, and make a column of like theological issues that are really important for you. And then think through what are some issues that are really important to me, but that are actually just like philosophy of ministry issues. And make those lists. And then when you go on this visit, try and understand what are some of the philosophy of ministry things. So, an example might be outreach methods. You might have a very strong opinion in your mind about how a church should do outreach, and the church might do it a different method. Now, that's not really a theological issue, but it's going to be something that's going to grind against you a lot. If you're in a second chair position, if you're a youth pastor, a worship pastor, an associate pastor, like the way that the senior pastor thinks about ministry, if you're not at least pretty close to being aligned, that's probably going to drive you a little nuts, especially if you're young
Yeah.
and you haven't really spent enough time in ministry to get those sharp edges knocked off yet. So I would just encourage you as best you can, really think through what are the theological issues that I actually really care about, that I wouldn't be able to follow, if the church has elders, I wouldn't be able to follow the elders gladly. I think that's another big thing too, is like Frank said, you're in a room full of elders. Are these a bunch of men that you can hear no from? That's really important, because you're going to hear no. If it's your first time candidating, my assumption is you're young, or at least young in ministry, and so you're probably going to have ideas that are going to get voted down. Can you take a no from your senior pastor and from the other leaders in your church? And that's the stuff that you see when you're on the candidating trip. Like you get to see people in the flesh, and you get to like understand their personality. And those are all really important things. And last thing I would say is, during your candidating trip, be punctual. Don't be showing up late on a Sunday morning to preach or to lead worship or whatever. I went to candidate in Montana years ago, and I misunderstood the time for the dinner that I was supposed to have with the elders and the senior pastor, and I was like 35 minutes late. Because I drove somewhere out of town on my free time with my wife to go see a different part of the city, and they called and were like, "Hey, we're all at the restaurant. Are you here?" And I was like, I thought it was at 6:30, and they were like, "No, it was at 6." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'll be there ASAP." We were already driving there, but like, man, you really got to check that stuff, because that I'm sure that was a big mark against me. And I said that was the last thing, but here is my last thing. You got to not be afraid to talk about money. Like, don't leave the candidating trip until you have the numbers conversation. There's a way to do it where you can be very clear, and you can ask, "Hey, I just want to understand exactly what the salary is and what the package is." And if they are unwilling to have that conversation, you probably don't want to work there, because that's going to be a very sticky issue. When I candidated one place, I got there Thursday, and I stayed till Tuesday. And on Monday night was the first time at a dinner at the pastor's house where we talked anything about money. And he slid a piece of paper across the table, and it was like 25% less than what I even thought it might be. And so it was like, man, we wasted everybody's time in this whole thing, because like, if I had been brave enough to ask that question, I would have known him. I might not even continue to pursue the interviews, let alone flying all the way from Florida to Montana to candidate. So I would just say, like, man, ask those questions.
Jeff, when you were talking about the list of things that, this is a deal breaker, this isn't, and then you said, if this a group of men, talking about the elders, I grew up in a very, very complementarian church. My parents met at Bob Jones University. If you think you grew up conservative, my parents met at Bob Jones University. So I mean, it does not get more so than that. And so for me, whether someone was complementarian or egalitarian, I always said that was a secondary issue for me when it came to the gospel. And then when I was offered a position at a church that was egalitarian, that was like ooh, okay, because now it's not just is this a group of men that can say no to me, but if I am putting myself under the authority of a group of elders, and I think someone might not be qualified to be an elder who's in that group of elders, and yet they're my authority, that was a conversation that I really had to have with myself. So in ministries, it takes so long to get hired in church world. I mean, it is regularly a 6-month process. And so you've spent 4 months, and now it's kind of the poo or get off the pot moment. And you're like, ooh, I've invested so much time into this. But it's going to be very unhealthy if you walk into something and you don't already know, hey, can I subject myself to the authority of the people that are over me? I was at a church in Texas while I was in seminary, and it was just a great fit all across the board for the first 2.5 years that I was there. And then the last 6 months that I was there, they hired someone to be the direct report of all next gen people. And he was a youth pastor who had aged out of youth ministry, but did not know anything about children's ministry. And so he figured he was just going to micromanage the youth pastors. And in that time, we had moved home because my wife was pregnant with baby number 2. And a week after I had moved home, the other youth pastor I was on staff with announced that he and his wife had been interviewing, and they were moving to Haiti to like fund or to launch this big mission that was already funded. And so they went from having 2 youth pastors at the beginning of the summer to having no youth pastors. And so I got a call from the guy who was the bad boss, who I just didn't click with, and he said, "Hey, I was told to ask if you would be willing to come back and step into the director of student ministry role." And at that point, I did not have a job lined up. My wife had a baby due in about 6 weeks, and we had a 15-month-old at home. And so I was like, oh, what are we going to do? And the more and more I prayed about it, it was, if I take that role, I am putting myself under that guy's authority. Before I was there already, they hired him. I didn't have a say in it. But if I come back, I am purposefully putting myself underneath the authority of someone who I don't really get along with and don't really respect. And when he called to see, when he said, I was told to ask if you would come back, that was not a, hey, we want you back kind of call. And so after a day or two, I was like, you know what? We're good. We're going to stay in Florida. And thank God we did. But make sure you can work for the people that you are signing up to be under, whether you're the senior pastor who is the first among equals when it comes to an elder board, or you're an associate pastor who's going to be under a senior pastor. Make sure that you can get up and go to work every day and not hate yourself for subjecting yourself to the authority of the people that you're going to be serving under.
Yeah, I know we're kind of running on this one, but I want a couple of things I would just add, because I'm listening to all this and it's just pinging it up, because you guys are bringing up a lot of like, make sure you know about the money, make sure you like do all of that. And I will say, it's okay in your candidacy for you to take home homework, like get some homework. When I interviewed at one church, I said, what's your doctrine? They gave me a book. I went home and read the book. That book had several red flags in it. I think it was Jeff. You said you need to write down things you won't compromise on. I have 3 issues. I will not compromise on them. 2 of them were overstepped in their doctrine book. So that made it real easy for me to say, no, get some homework in the form of doctrine. Also, we spend a lot of time talking about doctrine, and especially if you're just coming out of seminary, that's a real big deal, and that's talked about a lot. But one of the things I want to encourage you to do is ask them what is their philosophy of ministry as a church. Find that out. Do they consider themselves more evangelical? Do they consider themselves more, are they more what you would call a church growth movement church? Are they more discipleship oriented? Like, these things really impact the way you're going to be treated and the way you're going to be expected to carry out the mission of the church, which brings to the next thing, get the mission of the church. Kind of like Andrew says, if I can't respect those people, I can't serve in the church. If you can't buy into that mission, you sure as heck don't need to touch that church. And then, just real practically, I did this at my first church. I was 21 years old, and I interviewed a small town. And I said, I grew up in a small town, so I'm going to try something out. So when I got done interviewing at the church, I went to the gas station down the road. I said, hey, can you tell me about Bethel down the road? Oh, Bethel, man, they come in this community. They build ramps. They tell people, all right, cool. Word of mouth in a community goes a long way. Stop somewhere down the road and be like, hey, if there's a gas station down in the corner, they should know about your church. If they don't, then we have a problem. So I would encourage you, get some philosophy, see if you can buy into the mission. And then if you have the availability, do some homework in the area. And the last thing is, if you have which social media doesn't make it makes it very easy. If someone has filled this position you before, call that person. Call that person if you can get a hold of the person who had the previous role in your church, unless they went to prison for messing with somebody in your church. Okay, that's different. But call that person. I've had people call me about previous stuff, and then they've called me later and thanked me. And then I have called people about other positions back in the day, and people have keyed me in. Call the people who sat and ministered in that role before you, because they're going to be a great insight as well as you are candidating through these churches.
Can I just add one last thing that I'm thinking of? Post-candidating weekend, I think you probably need to wait at least a week before you're expecting to get some kind of answer. The likelihood is that, especially in a smaller church, there is a search committee or a hiring committee, and they are volunteers, and they probably only meet about once a week or so at the most. I think probably after a week, it's safe to send an email, just, hey, touching base, wondering if there's any feedback from the weekend. And from there, it can take a long time. Like Andrew said, a church can take 2-3 weeks to get back to you because their search committee, somebody got sick, they didn't get to meet, somebody had to work. They're all volunteers, especially in a smaller church setting, if that's you. So I would say be patient after the candidating weekend, but I think you're pretty safe. And I would love to hear your guys' opinion. I think after a week goes by, you're pretty safe to ask, hey, just wondering if there's any feedback from my weekend, any questions I can answer, any other issues that came up, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think a week is good. I think by that point, even if they haven't met yet to talk about it, they should be able to reach out to you and be like, hey, we're going to meet, like give you some timeline. And I think even like timeline while you're there, like, hey, so what does this look like after this? And
Yeah, I
they'll
don't think
probably
it's
say,
bad
like,
to ask that question. Like, how
Yeah,
long
yeah,
should I
yeah.
expect it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think these are all reasonable questions. Well, hey, we will post this video under this question in the Facebook group. But if you have more tips for this person who's candidating, you can write them in the comments on our Facebook group. Here's question number 2. Again, really, really practical. Speaking of Facebook groups, any suggestions on what to use to communicate with group leaders throughout a season? I would love to find something, preferably not a Facebook group or a group messaging app, that lets leaders communicate with posts and admins share information. Anything you have used before or worked well. So, guys, think about small group leaders. Think about maybe if you're over a specific ministry, like student ministry or kids ministry. How do you communicate with your leaders where people can effectively be informed, but also communicate back to you? What are the tools that you guys use? Are you guys using a Facebook group? Are you having a massive group text just on your iPhone? What are you guys doing?
Yo, that massive group text is where it's at, y'all. Are y'all in one of those?
I'm in them for sports with other parents, and I hate it.
Yeah, that's about it. We use GroupMe at our church. It's very helpful. We have one for each ministry and then we have another one for the leaders over that ministry. Make sure when you set up different, it's kind of like texting. The reason I like GroupMe is because it's its own separate app, and I can just swipe and turn off all the notifications on it and swipe and turn them on. When they're on a text message, it's not as easy as that. So for direct one-on-ones, we do use GroupMe. Also, I feel like if a student needs to message me in GroupMe, or if anybody does, I like that it just archives everything. Like, and I know if I ever need to have a conversation pulled that I ever had with anybody, it's just there in GroupMe. I just feel like that's responsible.
I mean, GroupMe is great. I like all the tools. You got polls. You can pin
And it's
stuff.
free.
It's free. You don't need really to make an account if you don't want to. It doesn't matter if you're on iPhone
Yeah, I don't know
or
about
Android,
y'all.
which is
Our
great.
local schools use it. So for me, it was something that all the parents, all adults, all students, so like half our church already understands the ethos behind it. So
Yeah.
it was easy just to adopt it into our ministry.
The question said he didn't want an app.
Right,
So
that's what I was about to say,
I'd
yeah.
say if you don't want an app, you can either have a
missed
sweet. You can launch a phone tree. Remember those? Those were cool. You could try an email chain. I don't know if you're familiar, but those work real well. In our fellowship hall, we have a bulletin board, and on the bulletin board there are some pens that are attached with ribbon, and you can write things on certain things to sign up or whatnot. But if you don't want an app,
Yeah. Whoops.
yeah, you're probably gonna have to go low tech, and maybe it's the good old fashioned huddle in the back of the worship center before something starts. Hey, here's what we've got going on tonight. Here's what you need to be looking out for. At this point in the sermon, band come back on stage. If whatever it may be, but if you don't want to use an app, you're going to have to train some carrier pigeons or something, because it's going to be tough to get all of the communication tools that are in GroupMe, that are in Slack, that are in whatever other app you want, or even email is going to be through an app 9 times out of 10. So either a bulletin board or face-to-face meetings or carrier pigeon is your best option.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
the question is
I'm
literally
sorry to cut you
refuting
off.
itself.
Yeah, I think one of the
I was just saying
Go
the
ahead.
question is like refuting itself. I don't want a messaging app, but I want small group leaders to be able to communicate with posts and admins to be able to share information. I think you want an app, is what you're saying.
Well, first off, the poster
Or a bulletin board.
this is not an anonymous question in our Facebook group. It's a young lady who posted this, so it's not a guy. First off, Andrew. Secondly, I think the person who wrote this post isn't necessarily asking a question of like, I think they don't want to be in a Facebook group. I think the challenge is a church when they're communicating will require so many different apps, so many different ways to navigate communication that it becomes overwhelming. And sometimes the end user is like, oh my goodness, another app
totally
I gotta
get that.
download.
Yeah,
And so I think they're trying to say like, what about the person who doesn't have Facebook or doesn't want to, literally doesn't have a Facebook or is active on there? That's dead communication for them. And people who maybe don't can't get a new app or whatever. The one suggestion I was thinking that might be a solution, but you're going to have to do some research on this, is actually like a mass texting feature where people can opt into a text message that you can send out saying, hey, here's, and maybe what it would look like, it's a short text, a couple of sentences with links to like a spreadsheet that says where everyone's at, or a link to a Google form that does the form that we want from GroupMe. And that way, what you're doing is you're sending out the information as the admin, and a lot of these new mass texting sites, they will, if you reply to them, it will go directly to you, but like in a website on a database. Like it won't go on your phone, but you can like kind of read through that. And a lot of these companies will have apps for the admin so they can actually send a text through their phone. So I think this could be a solution. I know churches that will have like multiple kind of like groups of different text. It's like an email list. You opt into that list, and then you can send an email specifically for that list. Now that it can get expensive. I mean, at minimum there's a monthly fee, but some of them they'll like actually allocate X number of text messages you can send in a given month. So if you have a list of 50 people and you only get 300 text messages a month, that only allows you 6 texts a month that you can send out. But I mean, if this is like a weekly thing, that might be more than enough, depending on how many people you have and what you need. So, Tim, you haven't answered.
Yeah, I think the specific question is for group leaders, right? Like specifically for, I'm assuming home group, small group leaders, something like that. And we went down this road because, yes, Planning Center has groups, and you can set that up in Planning Center, and it's a thing. But yeah, you might have to download another app. We've tried the Facebook groups thing before with leaders. I actually tried that in student ministry, where I would post the weekly leader guide there, and that's where we could comment and post. And that was ancient tech, like that was years ago. I don't think that's the way to go anymore. So then we as a staff and elders then had to decide, how are we going to communicate on a regular basis? Do we want to use GroupMe? Do we want to use Slack? And the overwhelming response was, we don't want another app. Can you just start a group text app and then put the picture of what that is, so I know? So all of my group texts have a very clear picture on them of Lakeview staff, Lakeview elders, home group leaders. So that was kind of it's a little old school, low tech, but all of our people do have a smartphone. Like none of our people don't. Maybe some of your people don't, but it's not carrier pigeon, but it's low tech. And I also have multiple fantasy football apps from the church too, and I just silence those. Like I only read those when I have time. That's like every other day. So there are ways to silence those group chats, but I know it's not fun, and I'm with you. I kind of don't want to download another app also. So I don't know. You have a lot of options if you don't want to download additional apps.
There is one thing. Like Tim, you guys use Planning Center. Do you use Planning Center groups?
We use, and that's what I'm saying. We do use Planning Center groups. All of our home group leaders are in there.
Do you use Church Center app?
We use the Church Center app.
Okay. Do you encourage your small group leaders to use the Church Center app to communicate with small groups, with their groups?
Yes. And 2 out of like 20 do it. And we have over and over said, guys, this is the best way to, and it is, because my home group leader, he will drop the notes in from our last home group session. Hey guys, here's what we talked about. He drops it right in there. I have it on the Church Center app. I can like it. I can comment on it. It's awesome. I think it's the best way to go about it, because it's not another group chat and it's a separate thing. But if the person says, I don't want another app, then that's really limiting it.
So this is a very specific thing for people who use Planning Center, who
Yep.
use groups within Planning Center, and who
Mhm.
use the Church Center app. If you've created a culture where your entire church is on the Church Center app, which that's the desire from Planning Center, is that this is like the way of churches making their own mobile apps are gone. People don't do that anymore. They're kind of transitioning into either making mobile friendly websites or using the Church Center app, which can kind of host everything you want. And
Right.
it's a cool feature for your site. In there, in the group, like you can communicate to your small group and like put docs and stuff like that in there, and it's meant for like small groups to be able to communicate with one another. It's its own messaging app. So one solution you can do, and I believe this person who's posting this uses Planning Center, uses the groups, uses Church Center. You could create a separate group for all the small group leaders and saying, hey, every small group leader is going to be in 2 groups on this app. They're going to be in a group for their small group, and they're going to be in a group for all the group leaders. And here, group leaders can message me, and also I can distribute information. You might not technically be using the app the way it was created to be used, but it's not a broken feature. Like, it definitely can be used. So with that being said, like, I think there's been multiple suggestions here that are useful. Any other suggestions from any of you guys that are thinking outside the box that we haven't thought of?
Okay, you want way outside the box? If you want to be able to communicate, I had to do this during a season with some leaders when we weren't meeting regularly. I just made a quick Facebook video every Monday, and I sent that. Not Facebook, YouTube video for the leaders, unlisted it, texted it to the leaders, and then in the comment sections they could comment back and forth, and that way I was able to communicate to them pretty directly, like I'm doing right now. And then if they want to interact with it below, they can do that. That way they don't have to create anything. Virtually everybody has a YouTube account or Google account. So it's just click on the link. Here's my little spiel, and now you have to go. So that's, if you want outside the box, that's one way to do it.
Well, this is a very niche question, which I love. I love these kind of very specific questions. I just realized, Tim, we want to hear from your book recommendation for the Practically Pastoring audience. What's a book that we should be reading that you've benefited from?
All right. So I'm bringing 2 to the table. There's a reason I'm bringing 2 to the table. One is it's kind of a personal thing. It could also be for youth pastors or for dads of teenagers. I've got soon to be 3 teenagers in my house right now living with me. They're my own kids. So the first one I'm going to recommend for you youth pastors and for you dads, parents of teenagers, is A Student's Guide to Sexual Integrity. It's by Jim Burns. And I'd also say the 2 books, I have one. This is the newbie. This one just came out hot off the press. This one is by Jim Burns. If you don't know him, he's a vet youth minister. He's a legend in the youth ministry world. His resources are always top notch. I'm actually using this right now as a devotional with my own kids. So every couple of nights, we'll read through a chapter. It's got discussion questions, and I'm kind of like small group leader dad. And what's funny is, like, my kids are like, hey, when are we doing the next one? Like, I thought it was going to be cheesy, and they're actually really liking it because it's kind of a dicey topic. They're like, what's dad going to say this time? So it's been kind of fun going through this with my own kids. And I get to put like my youth pastor hat back on in my own house. Second book, this is going to be for those of you who are leading staff meetings, or you are in charge of the devotional at elder meetings on a regular basis, which I am, and I do both of those things. So what I've been doing, this is an oldie but a goodie. I had to read this in seminary, so some of you guys are going to recognize this. It's Sticky Teams by Larry Osborne. The content is, you might consider it surface level, but it generates great conversation. That's what I love about it. So I take a little chunk of each chapter. For example, over the last 6 weeks at staff meetings, there's a chapter titled 6 Things Every Leadership Team Needs to Know. So I just took one of those each staff meeting. I read it, 3-4 paragraphs, not a long read. And then I just kind of asked the staff, what are your thoughts? What I like about this particular book that Larry does is it's a little bit off the wall. Like, it's not your conventional thinking. It's not your typical thinking. So it generates some really fun conversations. So those are your 2 recommendations. You've got Student's Guide to Sexual Integrity and Sticky Teams.
Love it. This was great. Hey, Andrew had to step out real quick because I think his son vomited his lunch. But while he is doing dad duty, we hope you come to the Practically Pastoring Conference. We hope you go to our Facebook group. We hope you check out our Instagram. We hope you go on YouTube, look at the shorts. hey, we're so glad you're here. We're going to be back next week. With that being said, I'm Frank Gill.
I'm Jeff Simpson.
I'm Delmar Pete.
Andrew Larson. And I'm Timothy Miller.
This is Presently Pastoring. See you next week. Bye.